Welcome to the 39th episode of The World of Running. I'm your host, Aditi Pandya. Ever heard of the term weekend long runs? Well, it's a staple for every runner. Long runs are important for building endurance, improving oxygen taking capacity, and building physical and mental strength. Before we go any further in today's episode, I have a request for all our listeners. If you like our podcast, please leave a rating on your preferred platform. Also, do share it with a fellow runner who is yet to discover us. If you like our podcast and are looking for even more tips to boost your running, head over to our YouTube channel, that is Geeks on Feet, and hit the subscribe button. We also have an informative newsletter that brings the latest from the world of running straight to your inbox, and we have its link in the show notes. In this episode, we explore various aspects of long run, types of long run, their importance, and how to approach them. We do not have any guest for today's episode as Arvind, the co founder of Geeks on Feet, is going to speak to us about long runs. In his last three marathon training cycles, Arvind has trained on a high mileage approach that is upwards of 100 kilometers per week, and he has seen significant performance gains. Arvind is a 3-hour and 23-minute marathoner and loves to geek out on all things tech and running. If you have been reading our articles, you probably already know him and his love for shoes, running science, and numbers. Also, check our earlier episodes with Arvind on hip mechanics and the importance of running form. The links are in the show notes. Hi, Arvind, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back here, Aditi.
So I see that you're currently on a low mileage as against the past three cycles, and how are you finding it?
I'm enjoying it. It is good to be on the low mileage for some time where you can focus on other things in life. So, yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Do you feel anything different and losing out when you see others on Strava having like still too many mileage and too much going on for them?
I think this is something that I learned over many years of using Strava, how not to get affected by others' Strava posts because context matters. So, currently, I'm training for a 10K. So, I'm good with the kind of training I'm doing.
Good to be in a Zen mode. So, Arvind, I want to start by asking you that can you define a long run and why should we train for longer distances?
That's a very, very good question because long run as a word has different meanings and there is a context in which it is used which might have a different meaning. So, in the context of marathon training, I think 18 kilometers and above is what I would define as a long run. But if you're running a shorter distances and training for shorter distance like a 10K or a half marathon, anything above, I think, 15 kilometers can be considered as a long run. But in all, I think 15 to 18 kilometers and above, I think is a long run. The other way to look at it, if you are, someone who is just starting out and probably, not running longer distances, you can look at by time. If you're spending more than an hour and a half on your feet, that could be considered as a long run.
So, Arvind, I also want you to touch base on the science behind long runs and how it improves our aerobic training and oxygen taking capacity and getting used to the grind.
Right. So human body is remarkable, right? And those who are running for years would probably know when we started running to what we are now, the kind of transformation that happens in our bodies, it's like a miracle. Say when I started running a kilometer at a 5 minute pace was a struggle, right? But now I can run like at a 450 pace, which is much faster than my kilometer pace when I started entire marathon distance. So these kind of adaptations and how the body transforms to handle that kind of intensity and load is remarkable, right? And long runs are something that is one of the triggers that will stimulate the necessary adaptations in the body to make that happen. So the way the long runs really work are three major ways. I'll not go into the depths of science on what happens when you run long, but I'll try to keep it simple so that most of our listeners can follow. Right. The first and foremost is the aerobic capacity, and that is the key engine behind the endurance as a activity, right? Whether it is running, cycling, swimming, anything. So, but in the case of running, this is the most important engine that we have, the aerobic engine. So long runs definitely helps the aerobic capacity. The way the long runs work is that they will improve your ability to take the oxygen all the way to the muscles and the cells that actually produce the energy. We, in fact, there is a well-known fact that the mitochondria, which is basically the energy sources of our body, the production of mitochondria increases as we run longer. Right? And long runs improves fat metabolism. I'm sure we have covered it in multiple episodes of various types of energy systems that we use, and fat is a very important energy source, which basically improved by running long. The capillary density, the ability to carry more oxygen to these cells, is improves. Strength of our heart, our ability to pump blood, at a much lower intensity of the heart, we will be able to improve more blood to be pumped. So that is another important thing. The second one is the musculoskeletal improvements, as in muscles and the bones. These are the important part of how we run, right? So the strength of the bones, the tendon strength, the endurance of the muscles, all of these improve because of long runs. More importantly, efficiency in which and how we run is improves because of long run, because the body adapts to the number of steps that we take in a longer run. So accordingly, it stimulates the efficiency, and hence it becomes better and better and better, right? And one of the things that probably you would have heard about, the various muscle types we have. So the muscles that make up our running, the endurance, which is the type 1 muscles, and then the intermediate muscles, and then fast twitch muscles. Long runs, of course, increases the production and efficiency of slow twitch fibers, and more importantly, the intermediate fibers, which can adapt to either become slow twitch or fast twitch. The long runs basically helps them to become more towards the slow twitch type of the effect. Right? So that is the second part of the long runs, why they are important. And third, the long runs also helps us psychologically, right? So many runners probably relate to this. When you run very first time a long run, it is extremely difficult, right? So your mental endurance is very low and it is challenging, right? So to finish a longer run, but as you run longer, your mental endurance improves, your ability to pace yourself. Like for example, a lot of mistakes that rookies do is that they pace too fast in the beginning of the runs, and then they struggle later part of the runs. So long runs kind of nudge you to ensure you pace yourself better, right? So pacing is another side effect of running long, right? So your ability to improve your pacing. So these are the three major effects how long runs improve you as a runner and helps you to run better.
So, Arvind, I also want to talk to you. And you spoke early on that for a marathon, the definition of a long run will be quite different than the definition of a long run when you do a half or a 10K. Now, we generally notice that there are runners who will put in 100-kilometer run weekly mileage for a half marathon, while there will be runners who can easily have a 50-kilometer mileage and do equally well, right? So what is the relationship of a long run and the overall running mileage?
That's a very good question. And there are many different ways to look at it based on which kind of a running training that you are using. For example, there are different schools of training, right? So you would know Jack Daniels, there is a one school of training. Pete Fijinger, that is a different school of training. First method of run less, run fast, Bill Pierce, whom we spoke in the podcast earlier. So he has a different philosophy to training. And then elite runners have a different philosophy altogether, right? So there are coaches like Renato Canova, they have completely different philosophy. And then there are many other coaches like Lydiards, Hal Higdons, Hansons, and so on and so forth. So everyone has their own formulas of, how should we look at the long run versus the overall mileage. What I'll do is that I'll give you a glimpses of these, probably that'll help. But there is no set formula, is what I wanted to say, right? For example, Jack Daniels keep the long runs as 20 to 30% of your overall weekly mileage, right? So that means long runs are much shorter in the case of Jack Daniels kind of a training approach. Wherein Pete Fijinger, who wrote the book Advanced Marathoning, in his training plans, you will see the long runs make up almost 50% of your training mileage, right? So if you're doing 100 kilometers, out of that 50 kilometers are coming from long runs alone, right? So that's a different philosophy. Similarly, if you're using run less, run fast, first method of training, long runs of significant portion of your overall mileage, because your overall mileage is lower. Like say if you're doing 70 kilometers a week, and out of that if you're doing a say 25 to 30-kilometer long run, so that is a significant portion of your overall mileage. So the best way I think is to look at it as, how how do you see it works for you, as opposed to set a fixed percentage of saying that this should be the long run distance because this is the mileage that I'm doing. Rather, I think the better approach would be to see which part of your training cycle, what kind of training you are doing, what distance you are training, and accordingly decide what would be the right long run distance that you want to pick.
Understood. So, Arvind, now you mentioned that you have a shorter mileage or a lesser mileage as compared to your marathon because you're training for a 10K. Now, do long runs help in shorter distances? And I would also want you to focus on if a beginner is training for a 10K, how should they progress with long runs?
Right, that's an excellent question. So, if I'm running 5K or 10K, are long runs are really necessary, right? That's a question everyone has. Um, like what we spoke about the benefits of long runs help everyone, right? Whether you're running training for a 10K or a half marathon or a marathon or a ultra marathon, long runs does help. Even for 5K, long runs does help, right? Now, what should be the distance of the long runs? That's a very interesting question, especially as you go to the shorter distances. But what we really need to understand is what kind of muscles typically used when you run shorter distances, right? Say if you're running a 5K, and if you have to look at the muscle fibers in terms of what we use, 100% of these slow twitch fibers are used even when you're running a 5K, right? Even you're running a shorter distance like a mile, right? Not even 5K. Mile is like in India we have 1500 meters, right? So even a mid distance runners, 1500 meter runners, has to have a significant portion of their muscles which used in their races are slow twitch fibers. In fact, 100% of their slow twitch fibers will be recruited when they are racing 1500 meters. So slow twitch fibers get efficient when you run long. That is the only way they get more and more and more and efficient, right? So whether you are a mid distance runner like a 1500-meter runner or a 5K runner, 10K runner, long runs does help, right? So now the question comes in is what should be the distance, and that would be a tricky one, especially if you're starting out. I would suggest go by time as opposed to fixed distance, like say 1.5 hour run. And then as you slowly get better, and if you're running, say, for many years, and then you're running and training for a 5K or a 10K, yes, in that case, you can go for long. And different training approaches talks about a different distances as long runs. But for 10K, I think anything above 15 kilometers is a good long run if you're experienced, right? So otherwise, go with the time-based approach, which is 1.5 hour. And if you're going a little advanced and you are like a amateur elite, or you're kind of somebody really looking to clock say sub 40-minute kind of a 10K, then I would suggest even go up to 25 kilometers, like 15 miles kind of a distance as your long run.
Understandable. So, Arvind, I have to ask you about different types of long runs, right? And as a beginner, when I started running, I used to get very confused when people would tell me stuff like, go for a long tempo run or a medium long run or a goal paced long run. And these can be very, very confusing for somebody who is just starting their journey as a runner, or they're just trying to going for their first half marathon or a 10K. So can you explain the various approaches of long runs and what are the benefits? We can pick up one or two and then leave it there.
So this is a very good question, and please feel to fill in if I miss out anything, because I
Sure.
think this question probably is the crux of the whole episode. So let us spend some time, and then please feel to add as I speak. So see, the type of long runs that you use depend on the kind of outcome that you're looking for, right?
Sure.
So especially when you are training for a race, and we have discussed plenty of times about periodization, the micro cycles of how you train. Now as you periodize your training, there are different objectives you would have, right? So say base building versus say building strength versus peaking, and so on and so forth, working on endurance, peaking, tapering, etc., right? So based on that, you would kind of decide what should be the objective of the long run, right? And for example, the tempo long run that you mentioned, which is basically a long run but part of the distance run at a tempo pace, right? So
Yes.
the idea is that you work on close to lactate threshold pace during the long run for some part of the long run. So when you do that, you are basically building the ability to run at that kind of a pace, which is close to threshold pace, which is very important for, say, a 10K or a half marathon. So if you're training for a half marathon and you're trying to build the race specific strength and endurance, then a tempo long run would be an excellent idea, right? That may not have as much value in the case of, say, a marathon, for example, right? So when you're training for a marathon, the other type of long run that you mentioned is the medium long run. Medium long runs are staple of my training, especially when I train for a marathon. So these are long runs, but at a very steady pace, right? So they don't have there's nothing uh, exciting about these runs, right? These are boring, but they are a steady pace. Like say, they would be mid-zone to kind of pace, right? So you would be able to run, and then you'll be able to recover quickly for the next day workout. Like say, day after you have a tempo workout, but you want to fill in tomorrow's with a long run or some mileage. So medium long runs works best as that fill-in kind of runs, right? So you'll be running something like 18 kilometers or 20 kilometers at a decent pace, not too fast, not too slow, at a pace that it'll try to put you at some stress, but not a big enough stress that you cannot recover quickly for the next day, right? So that would be a kind of what you would use to fill in, and then similar fatigue that is required for you to adapt for the marathon. So those are medium long runs. And then you have the type of runs which are goal paced, right? So goal paced could be half marathon. In that case, tempo long runs act as the goal paced runs. For people training for a marathon distance, a full distance, in that case the goal paced runs will be slightly different. You will be running at your marathon pace or slightly faster than your marathon pace. And normally this would be in blocks, because you cannot run entire long run at a marathon pace, then that would be extremely hard to recover. So the type of approach most runners follow is that you would take like some part of your long run, maybe say you run a warm up of say 8 kilometers, and then you run another 10 kilometers at your goal pace, and then maybe you can give a break for about 2 3 kilometers, and then I can run another 5 kilometers at goal pace, right? So that is one way to incorporate goal pace into your long run. So these are goal pace long runs. There are many patterns that you can figure out, and to make it interesting as well, right? So you could have, say, 10 plus 10, like that is 20 kilometers of long run, or you can have one single block of 20 kilometers of long run, or you can have 5 kilometer blocks, like four of them, right? So you can try different patterns that works best for you, and each of them have their own unique benefits. So you would accordingly choose them. Like say initial part of your training, keep the blocks smaller, but make them more. Like say 3 blocks of 5 kilometers, and then later parts of the training you want to have longer blocks, like say 15 kilometer blocks, one 15 kilometer block and one 10 kilometer block. And as you go even further, you might want to have just one long 24 kilometer block, right? So it depends on how and where you are and what stage of training. So that's how you would use goal paced run. So I think these are the kind of long runs you typically look at. And one other thing that I would normally do in long runs is that incorporate surges, especially steady long runs, like where you don't use any goal pace or threshold pace kind of blocks. What you can do is that you can have surges towards the end, like running
Yeah.
slightly faster, closing on to say a marathon pace, right? So like say 2 3 kilometers at the end. Another thing that people do is the progressions, right? So they start at a much steadier place in the beginning, and then as they go towards the end of the long run, they increase the pace and they go beyond the marathon pace or goal pace, right? Like say go into threshold pace, or sometimes even touch the 10K race pace, right? So that would be kind of a progressions that you can do. So these are the various types of long runs, and I think all of them have their place in terms of where they come in your training. And the art here, right, there's no science. The art here is to figure out when to use which one, right? So that's where the trick comes, and that's where you get the maximum benefit.
So, Arvind, I also feel that long runs help in mental stability and getting mentally trained, right? Basically, for me personally, I felt all my long runs were helping me just to get ready for those grueling last 7 to 8 kilometers, like after the 35th kilometer, when we typically say that the marathon will start after the 35th kilometer. So yeah, and I also want to understand, Arvind, like you spoke a lot of designing, right? Bringing in surges, bringing in periodization and progression. But if say take let's take one example when somebody is actually preparing for their debut marathon, right? And they want to design their long run based on say their goal, and we can keep a goal just for the benefit of our listeners to be 4 hour. They want to run a 4 hour marathon. So if you can help in bringing some texture with respect to uh, how to how to design this long run, right? In whether it is a mix of 60% of progression or 40% of progression, and the rest can be at a medium long run pace. So if you can just talk about it.
Yeah, that's a excellent question. So designing long run, I kind of covered the kind of things that you can experiment with in your long runs. But I think when you have to design your long runs to be effective and they're not monotonous, right? So more importantly, I think one of the misconception people have is that long runs means they have to be slow, right? Frankly, slow, when people say, it's a relative word, and then people tend to run too slow actually. So I've seen people barely running or jogging, right? So that is the kind of long runs they do. So frankly, those, while you're spending so much time on the foot, they may not be very effective when it comes to the benefits of the long runs that we spoke. So hence it is important to kind of ensure that you design the long run such that the paces are really stimulating the kind of benefits that you're really looking for, right? So one common issue with many runners is that their inability to finish the race stronger, right? Especially beginners, they tend to run too fast in the beginning and then end up slowing down significantly, right? Significantly, as in their walk and cramping and many other things, right? So here where long runs with surges help. So you have a component of your long run towards the end where you have 3 or 5 kilometers where you're running much faster. So you can start with, as a beginner, say last 2 kilometers faster, And as you progress, you can increase that last 2 kilometers to last 3 kilometers, last 5 kilometers, last 8 kilometers. So that would be way in which you, kind of, they prepare for the ending stages of your marathon. So if you're a 4 hour marathoner, you're targeting, say, something like 5:45, the pace, something like that. So what you do is that initial part of the kilometers, maybe say if you're doing a long run of 30 kilometers, so till 25th kilometer, you run at a much slower pace, like say 6:10 kind of pace. And then the last 5 kilometers, you can bring it down to your marathon pace, right? Again, that can be gradual. You don't need to be sudden, right? So 6:10 to 6:5, then 5 minute pace, and then 4:50 pace, and sorry, 5:50 pace, and then 5:40 pace, and so on and so forth, right? So you kind of pick up yourself to do that to at a much faster pace. So these are the surges. The other important one, which will help you in your first marathon, especially, or this is actually true for any marathon, not necessarily first marathon, is the long runs with hills. So especially if you are doing a hilly course, these are super important, right? Say you are training for something like Hyderabad marathon or even Bangalore marathon. It has a lot of rolling hills, right? So in that case, your long run should have hills as part of the long run itself, right? So maybe a portion of the long run, not necessarily the entire long run, right? So go on to a course where you have hills, so that you are training for the hills, because hills have a different effect on the kind of adaptations they throw up, which are basically fun to do with your ability to generate more force, and your ability to kind of endure the hill itself, right? So the higher heart rate that basically happens when you run on the hills. The another one which I would look at, and probably little advanced, probably not for beginners, but if you are running multiple marathoners and multiple marathons so far, and then you have kind of not able to reach that 4 hour goal for whatever the reason, right? In most of the cases, your inability to pace the pace that you're looking for to the entire distance, right? That's commonly what I see. I mean, if you look at the data from any marathons in India, we have analyzed a lot of data, and you can see our timing data analysis. Majority of the runners slow down after about 35th kilometer, and then they significantly do positive splits, right? So, and this is where long runs which are done like doubles, like say for example, there are two ways to do it. You can do doubles, as in you can do a longer run on Saturday and another longer run on Sunday. The Saturday long run can be, say, something shorter, like say 18 kilometers, but at a much intense pace, like close to, say, half marathon pace, or much faster than your marathon pace. And then you can do a Sunday long run, little longer, but at a much easier pace, like slower than your marathon pace, right? Say 10 seconds off or 20 seconds off from your marathon pace. So here you're training that kind of a fatigue that will put you during the marathon. So you're training for it, right? So other way to do it is doing doubles morning and evening. That is another way. That is a little advanced. I don't suggest that for especially those who are running second or third marathon. But if you run like more than 5 marathons, and you kind of know your body well, then you can try doubles, where you can do a morning run probably at a marathon pace, an evening run at slightly slower than marathon pace or close to marathon pace, right? So that way you're kind of simulating that fatigue without the side effects of putting too much mileage in one go, right? So for example, if I have to run doubles and I'm running, say, over the 2 days, say something like 45 kilometers, versus doing that on a single day, that will be significantly tough on your body, and it will take more time for you to recover. And I would not recommend that in a marathon cycle, because you have to continue training, right? So I think I kind of covered the different types of long run. Did I miss anything, Aditi? You have some ideas which I missed out?
No, you've covered everything, Arvind, and I was just trying to relate our training in our previous marathon cycle, and how did it go, and what were the benefits of it. Um, Marathon is so personally, I feel marathon is going to throw some curveballs, and the more you practice, the better it is for the body,
Right.
and It just helps you to plan and redefine your paces during the race itself. So the beauty of a marathon is also, if you are 10 seconds faster or slower during the course, you can readjust and get back on track if
Yeah.
you've trained the way Arvind has mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, very well said. Very well said. I can't describe any better like how you described in terms of what this marathon is all about.
Yeah. So, Arvind, I also want to talk about fueling and hydration. And so, basically, all of us, right? Considering the two of us are there, I know that our hydration and our nutrition strategies are very different. So, I am a person who do not eat before a marathon, and it's just that my stomach can't take it, and I just run with a black coffee and last race I took 8 gels, which was two gels extra than my I mean, I was expecting 7 gels max, but I had to take an extra gel, and I also was cramped after the 28th kilometer. And I know that if we don't have enough salts and hydration, this cramping is inevitable. um, so I want to understand from you that how would be an ideal hydration and nutrition strategy during the race, and it can only happen during the race when you've trained for it, right? So even for the practice long runs.
Right. So, let's tackle one at a time because hydration, nutrition, these are like vast topics. So let's start with hydration, then probably we'll go into the nutrition later. So in terms of hydration, the key factor to look at is how much we are sweating, right? Because
Yeah.
sweating is how we lose the water from the body, and then we need to replenish it, right? So there's no point in taking too much water either, because that'll can have other side effects, as in you will have to stop for a low break. It doesn't make much sense either, right? So I think the key here is to understand how much you sweat, and then, as you rightly said, you have to train that in your practice runs, right? So in practice runs, you would know what kind of, I mean, how much sweat you typically have, and then you train with different quantities of water, and then see how it works out for you. But that said, there can be guidelines, right? So if you want to start with, what normally is at about 500 ml of water for an hour of running, right? So if you're running long, then consume around 500 ml of water an hour, right? So that'll kind of sets you there, and then you can experiment. Okay, maybe you might need a little bit more, maybe you need a little bit less, right? So you try different options. Now, the other way to look at is that you can, one of the runs, you say run long, and you see before the run what is your weight, and after the run what is your weight, and then see
Mm.
how much you are losing in terms of sweat. And normally, what happens in a longer run, your weight, if you see, you might at least see a difference of 1 kilo to 2 kilos, right? So,
Yeah.
and that is basically the amount of water you lost, right? And it is impossible that you can drink so much water. Like, suppose, say, 2 kilos of weight you lost, or 3 kilos of weight you lost, and actually there are studies, elite athletes lost up to 4 to 5 kilos of weight after a marathon race, right? So it is impossible to drink that much water, but that gives you a fair understanding of what you're losing, right? So then you can experiment accordingly, right? So that is what I would put it as, the water or intake of water that you need to do. Now, water alone may not be sufficient based on the kind of sweat rate you have. Electrolytes makes another important part of the hydration, right? So what you take along with the water, and these are like sodium, magnesium, potassium, and so on and so forth. Many people prefer taking, a sport drink, say something like Fast and Up, Reload, or Gatorade, or any favorite brand you have. So these basically comes with built-in electrolytes and some amount of carbs, so they help you otherwise as well. So those would be important, especially if you're a sweaty runner, and then also if you have tendency to cramp more, right? Like, for example, I have more tendency to cramp, so I used to take electrolytes significantly earlier, but over time, your body physiology changes, and you probably wouldn't need as much electrolytes as you think you would need. So experiment again with how much electrolytes you want to take. You don't necessarily have to fix up on a set quantity and go with it. So experiment. Now remember, so the training that you are doing can be in different conditions compared to your race, right? Like for example, you're
Yeah.
training in say Mumbai or Chennai, your sweat rate might be extremely high compared to you're racing say in Delhi in winter, right? So the sweat rate will be very different. So you have to train accordingly and you have to prepare accordingly. So the kind of water you consume in Mumbai or Chennai or even Bangalore may not be the kind of water you want to consume, in a race in Delhi or maybe in a colder environments like if you're going for a world marathon major, say in London or Berlin, right? So that would be the context is important there as well, right? So this is about hydration. Shall we? Anything did I miss, Aditi, on the hydration?
No, no, not at all. But I mean, let's focus on now. We can go on nutrition and
Nutrition, right?
pre-race nutrition, especially.
Right. So yeah, since we're talking about pre-race nutrition, I just want to also add that electrolytes are best consumed pre-race, as in you do it before the long run itself, right? Like say I have a long run on Saturday or a Sunday, you consume electrolytes the day before. Like say you could have electrolyte drink uh, through the day, or few times a day, sip through the day, whatever the way you like it. So apart from electrolytes, what you have to consume, in terms of pre-long run, of course, carbohydrates. They are the most important part of the fuel that you will use during the long run. So having the previous night of the long run, especially if you're doing, say, a race simulation or if you're doing a marathon paced or goal paced long runs, you might want to consume carb heavy a meal, not heavy meal as in general, but carb heavy as in significant portion of the meal is carbohydrate. So that could help, as part of your long runs energy availability. Uh, Apart from that, you could have the before the run itself, right? Like say if you're running long and then an hour before the run, you can have something, right? So this could be any food. It could be gels, it could be a sport drink, it could be even proper food like say poha, bread, pasta, oatmeal. So you can try, but again keep it light because many people have issues with intensity of their workout when they take food before the workout. That can affect them in various ways, right? So try what works best for you. Many people just go with bananas and dates, right? So to summarize, the previous day of the long run, you might want to take something carb heavy and then also top up with electrolytes. And then an hour or 2 hours before the long run, you want to try out the sport drinks and whatever favorite things that you have. And remember, whatever you're trying, you probably want to try it in a way that what you will do in the race, right? That is when you get the best benefits because you kind of used to certain routine. Then that makes it much easier on the body on the race day as well.
So, Arvind, can you talk about the fueling during the run, right? Like, I'll talk about mine that I have a gel every seventh kilometer, and it has more or less worked. Sometimes during the race itself, I might start taking the gel around the fifth or the sixth kilometer in the second half of the race, just to ensure that I'm not depleting on carbs or salts, right? And as a rule, I sip every third kilometer water. Like I have a reload, I drink reload and I sip every third kilometer, right? So, can you talk about the race during race strategy?
So during the long run, so depending on the race versus long run, you might want to take slight differences because you're not running at the same intensity as a race during long runs typically.
Yeah.
So one I would suggest is the frequency of gels. Suppose you're taking gels as the primary source during the run in terms of nutrition.
Mhm.
You might want to space out a bit more, like say instead of every 7 kilometers, you might want to say every 8 kilometers or 9 kilometers, right? So that is one I would suggest. But again, you see what kind of long run you have. If you're the race simulation and you're running closer to the goal pace or faster than goal pace, you might want to consume more gels. But that is one way. So gels is an important part of nutrition for most runners because they are easy to carry, easy to consume. And then energy availability is much quicker, right, compared to say solid foods. Like I've seen people eating bananas during long runs, but and of course it's not very efficient, but if it works for you, please go ahead with that, right? But yeah, one is spacing of the in terms of timing of the fueling, it can be different in your long runs versus the races. So some of the guidelines I'll just mention which can be used in long runs and races is that uh, taking about 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour, right? That is typically what people take for races. But these days, there is a research that shows that you can go up to 90 grams of carbs, per hour, which will be beneficial. So taking too many carbs can have other side effects, including bloating and other issues. So you figure out how many grams that you can take. Again, experiment. So long runs are the best way to experiment.
Understood. So, Arvind, I also want to talk about making runs comfortable with the kind of gears that we use, the kind of like what time we start running. And especially when you mentioned, I mean, I heard you mentioning earlier that you sweat differently in different weather, right? So we have to again simulate our routes and the kind of weather that we are going to run on the race days. So, how can we make those things more known and, incorporate these things?
First and foremost, dry fit clothing. And again, dry fit, there are varieties of types. There are dry fit clothing, which is significantly polyester. There is significantly nylon based. So you see what works best for you. Personally, I prefer the ones which are polyester based mesh clothing because I sweat a lot. I don't like the fabric to stick onto my body, right? And hence I use that. Other important part is the chafing, right? And clothing, and this is something you realize when you run long, as that clothing is something that causes chafing because of the friction. And try picking up clothes which have fewer seams or seamless. There is a lot of clothing that is coming without seams now. So pick up those kind of clothing, which basically makes you a lot more comfortable. The other important thing is that long runs you would need access to fuel, access to hydration. So you would have to have some mechanisms of carrying them portably, right? So this is where hydration belts or hydration bags or flip belts. I personally prefer flip belts. This is something that you can just put it on top of your shorts, and these have pockets where you can keep your gels and then maybe your electrolyte tablets, or even some of them have enough space for you to put like bottles, right? And another trick here, there are soft flasks that you can get. These are much easier to carry compared to, say, a hard bottle. So that is another way to make it easy for you to carry the hydration during the long runs, right? So then heat is another important part which you need to deal with in long run. So wearing a cap, if you are comfortable, that would be a good one too. And then wearing shades. There are sports shades, which will help you to tackle the sweat while your ability to see the road well. So the plenty of models, Oakley has a lot of models for that. And then more importantly, when you run, you tend to sweat a lot. So the glasses get tend to get foggy. So you have to find the right glasses which doesn't fog during the run. So that would be important when you are running in the heat. And other things to make it comfortable: run early, frequent hydration, especially when you're running in the heat. Also, you plan your route so that it makes it comfortable. For example, access to hydration, right? So don't go on a route where you cannot find hydration, right? So either run in smaller loops where you can come back to a place where you can keep your hydration, or you carry hydration. So you plan your routes accordingly, so that you have access to your fueling and other options during the long run. So that way, it makes it a lot more comfortable. And more importantly, long runs can be daunting in terms of mental strength. So pick routes which are something that you enjoy, right? Either it's based on what you like, right? So if you like nature more, maybe pick routes which have a lot more trees and natural scenery. If you like people more, then pick routes which are like in the city center, where you see a lot more other runners and parks and all that, where you see more runners and all that. So you figure out what works best for you so that it makes you comfortable. And other trick is that, the runs where you really need to run long, buddy up, right? So that's another way to make it comfortable.
Yeah. So Arvind, I have so much to learn from you, right? I've never worn a cap or a sunglass as yet. I think it gets more important when you're running a world major, because generally our timings, you start much later in the day. So yeah, I mean, I was just studying that. I have not done any of these things as yet, but yeah, maybe I might just
Yeah, yeah.
require.
I mean, I think we all figure out as the need arises, right? So,
Yeah.
I think one thing I missed out is singlets, right? So, yeah, that's the other one when you're running in the heat. Singlets will really, really help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that has helped me is I wear uh I wear singlets and shorts which I've worn multiple times during the practice. So I have no surprises, right? I know if there is going to be any itchiness or something. I know when it will start or which t-shirt to use and not to use. So just one thing is, don't wear a new t-shirt or a shorts on a race day. That might blow you out, right? Because that's
Yeah, yeah.
something you've not
So,
tried.
totally, I totally agree. And that is what the long runs are for, right? So, long runs is
Yeah.
where you try all this, and then
Mm.
races is where you just repeat them.
Yeah, you just repeat them. You be as predictable as possible. Yeah. So, Arvind, how I'm coming to the last part of this podcast. I want to ask you about recovery from long runs, right? So, how to recover, what to fuel as part of recovery, and I know for sure that protein has helped me recover much faster as compared to earlier time. I think I've increased my protein intake multifolds, I must say. And I use plant protein, and I my thing is to have eggs or poultry, like I like fish or chicken if I'm running longer. Otherwise, even during training, even if I'm like, I ensure that I take sufficient protein so that I don't end up injuring myself, right? So, what are your thoughts on recovery and fueling post long runs?
Right. So, yeah, I think the recovery starts from the during the long run itself, right? Like kind of nutrition fueling that you're doing during the long run has a significant effect on how you recover, right? So, if you run low on energy during the long run, like for example, a lot of people say, okay, I don't need so gels during the long run, right? I mean, while that works, but I think that has significant effect on your recovery time. So ensure that you time your nutrition during the long run also properly so that you can recover quickly, right? So it's not like by the end of the run you're fully done and then you take 2 days to recover, right? Should not be the case. So now after the run, what you do, I think that is also, if not, that is the most important part of what you do, is the fuel that immediately you take after the run, right? So that is a protein rich fuel. But the key is here, a lot of runners I saw take just the protein shake, but protein absorption is best when you take it along with carbohydrates, right? So that is important. So if you're taking protein shake, try to ensure you have some carbs in it. It could be mixing it with some banana, or mixing it with dates, or if you can take even solid carbohydrates, like say eating some breakfast like bread or whatever, right? So it may not be as portable like carrying a protein shake, but you have to figure out that. So taking some carbohydrates along with the protein will gives you the best absorption and a quick recovery, right? The other thing, which is I think, in my view, important post long run, is to, um, if you can, take a short nap, right? Power nap. I think that significantly helped me to recover better, especially during goal paced runs, where the recovery can be a little tricky, or the runs where I had to tune up our simulations, right? So these are, again, I need some power nap, like 10-minute nap after the run. Definitely helps. Then other thing that many people take is to take extra amino acids apart from protein supplements. So that is something you may want, you may not want to, but experiment. If you are the kind where you're okay with supplements, you can try that as well. And hydration during the day, right? Like say sipping electrolytes during the day after the long run, that will also help recover quickly. And in the evening of the long run, you might want to have a small mobility session, right? Of some foam rolling and some stretches, and especially the everyone has some of the other muscles which are their Achilles heel, right? Like say calves for me, or heels for someone, or plantar for someone, right? So you figure out those and then work on that the evening of the long run, so that you can quickly bounce back and then ready for your next run.
Sure. Yeah, I think, yeah, I feel a lot of things that went right was thanks to the foam rolling, right? You make foam rolling and your foam roller your best friend post a long run, and a lot of things
Yes,
will be solved.
right. Yeah,
So I
I think
want
that's
to,
the important thing is that the timing of the foam rolling. One thing you have to, this is something a lot of research shows that you have to give the body enough time to adapt before you foam roll. As in, you should not foam roll immediately after the long run.
yeah.
You give enough time, like say 8 hours or 9 hours, and then you foam roll. Yeah.
So, Arvind, I want to end today's episode on your favorite topic, and that is shoes. And can you talk about long runs and shoes, and which would be good shoes for long runs?
All right. Okay. So this is a very interesting topic for me, but I'll try to keep it simple. I don't want to make it too complicated and make it tough for runners. See, typically the long runs where you're pounding the ground for so long, you need some support from the shoes. The role of the shoes in long runs essentially is to provide enough protection so that you can go through those many number of steps that you're taking in a long run, like 30,000 steps or 40,000 steps that you take during a long run, maybe even 50,000 steps that you take, depends on your cadence, right? Now, cushion shoes are your friend. And then how do you choose the right cushion shoe? The shoes come in the stack size, right? So the 40 is the legally acceptable cushion stack as per race legal. But see, since we are not racing in long runs, we can go beyond that also. So 40 and above, right? So there are many options. Above 40 there are options like Asics has an option called Super Blast that is about, I think, 49 or something, which is like a really really big stack. Kinvara Pro from Saucony. Adidas has something called Primex tongue. It has two carbon plates and then a lot of stack. I think it is 50 plus stack it has. Nike has something called Tempo Next Percent. So these are like high stack shoes that goes beyond the legal limits of the typical racing shoe. But since these are about long runs, we are talking about training, and these would be super useful. The reason for that is that why you want to use it, that is because you can recover quickly, right? So then under 40 there are many shoes, 38 to 40 that would be, I think, normally what I would prefer as the my long run shoe. So based on the brand, you can pick up the right shoe. For example, if you're a Nike fan, then Nike has Jumex Invincible. That's a long run shoe. It is amazing shoe. Saucony Triumph, that is an excellent shoe as well. Brooks has Adrenaline, that's an excellent shoe. Asics has Gel Nimbus, that is a 40 stack, that's an amazing shoe. Hoka has Bondi, Carbon X. There are multiple shoes which are all high stack shoes. So Adidas doesn't seem to have any high stack shoes other than Primex tongue, which basically goes above 40 But in the range of 40 they don't have many shoes. Their highest stack probably is the Adidas Boston 12. That's about, I think, 34 or 33, something like that. I can't remember exactly. So that would be a good choice if you're going with Adidas. But otherwise, check out shoegeeks.in. We have a search with stack size, so you can select the stack size and then find out all the shoes that matches that criteria, right? If you are going for race-based runs, I would suggest go with the racing shoe itself. So I think that's kind of how I would look at the shoes and the long runs.
Thank you, Arvind. This was excellent, and I wish you all the best for your TCS 10K. Is there anything we've missed out?
Nothing. I think thanks Aditi for calling me again, and happy to be here. Yeah, good luck for your off-peak training. So enjoy that phase, and then good
Thank you.
luck for your next race.
I would like to thank all our listeners, and if you like this episode and would like to know more on the world of running, please subscribe to our channel. And if you know of someone who is starting their journey into fitness and running, do share our podcast link with them. I would like to thank my friend Arvind for editing, sound recording, and taking care of the post production for this podcast. If you have any suggestions on improving the content of the show or topics you would like us to cover, please share it by emailing us at connect@geeksonfeet.com. Or you can also reach us through Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram